Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to clean the carburetor on my KTM 300. So if you watched my previous video, in that I spoke about how my KTM has been sitting idle for over a year. So this has caused old petrol and 2T oil to pretty much clog up the jets in the carburetor, and the bike just wasn't starting. And in that video I went through the process of taking the carburetor out of the bike. It was fairly simple. I'll add a link to the video in the description. And today I'm going to start cleaning up the carburetor and get it back on the bike. So let's get started. Before I start taking things apart, I think I'll give it a good clean because there is some dust and debris on the outside, and it's always better to clean it up because you don't want any of that going on to the inside of the carburetor. So the carburetor now is in a relatively clean state. I think it's safe enough to say that I can start taking things apart without having dirt go back into it. So I might start with the float bowl, which collects a lot of dirt because everything goes and settles in there. So it turns out that the float bowl is actually pretty clean. So I'm going to move on to the jets now. So what I am going to do is pretty much have these three dipped in a cleaning solution, or rather a degreaser, and let it soak over the next maybe 24 hours. That will hopefully clean it up well enough, and I'll start putting things back together. So while the carb is being cleaned, I'm going to drain out all my old petrol. Now this petrol is well over a year old, so it's probably gone stale, and the fact that it's mixed with 2T oil doesn't help. So let's get rid of this so that when we got the new clean carb on the bike, we can run fresh petrol, and we pretty much eliminated another fail point that keeps the bike from starting. So after I took the carburetor off, I removed the float bowl, and the gasket along the float bowl looks pretty fine. Doesn't look like it's damaged. And then I removed the three jets. First we've got the jet for the choke, then we've got the pilot jet, and then we've got the main jet. So after dismantling the carburetor and removing the jets, I cleaned the jets with some degreaser, pretty much let it soak for, well, 2 days now. Something surprising is that the degreaser was originally yellow when I put it in here, but it has turned into a bit of a blue. So I'm guessing that's the rust that's discolored the degreaser. So looking at the jets now, they do seem a lot cleaner. I can see right down the hole, which should be good enough. So there's this tool that you can use to clean the jets even better. Essentially a feeler gauge, but with thin pointy wires. You could just send it through the little holes and kind of brush out any debris inside it. I don't have such a tool with me, so I'm going to use some electrical wire and send it through the hole and kind of rub it through. So I'm going to use a couple of different thicknesses, so one with just 2 fibers and one with the rest of the fibers. Give it a brief cleaning. So in the next step, I'm going to blow some pressurized air through the jets just to clean it up. For that, I'm going to use a simple bicycle pump. So I'm going to fit the jets to the tip of the valve, tighten it, and give it a good pressure. That was pretty easy, and interestingly, you do realize how big or small the actual jets are because the pressure you feel on the bicycle pump kind of gives a good idea. So the main jet had the least resistance, which means it's got the biggest hole because it needs to push out a lot of petrol. Then we have the pilot jet, which was very tight, so meaning very little air was going through it. It's just meant to keep the bike idling. And then we have the jet for the choke, which didn't give too much pressure or too little pressure, again doing what it's supposed to do. And so now I'm going to put the jets back into the carb. So fitting the jets back onto the carb is a fairly simple process. I'm going to start with the main jet, and it's tightened with a 6mm spanner. Then we've got the pilot jet, goes into this little recess over there, sinks right in, and you need a flathead screwdriver to tighten that. So the screwdriver needs to be a very narrow head. I bought this screwdriver specifically when I was doing the jets on the DRZ because the narrow head means you can get it into the tiny narrow hole. Next we've got choke jet. So we've got the jets back on. So that's the choke jet, the pilot jet, and the main jet. Hopefully the cleaning was successful. I am now going to put the float bowl back on. Generally the float bowl shouldn't leak if the gasket's good, so I'm just going to tighten it up, and once we put it on the bike we'll notice if there are any leaks. So someone actually mentioned that you don't need to take the carburetor off the bike to clean the main jet and the pilot jet. What you can do is essentially rotate the carburetor out a little bit and then undo the float bowl's drain bolt and take the jets out through that, which does sound fairly plausible, and because there's so much space in there, it can probably turn without any issues at all. Being my first time, I decided to take it off out of habit, and hopefully this will be the first and last time I need to do this. I'm going to now move on to fitting the carb onto the bike. So something you would have noticed when I took the carburetor off is that the flap that controls the airflow into the carburetor actually stays connected to the throttle cable and pretty much eases the process of taking the carb out. So the carb is going to go back in, pretty much the same process but in reverse. So this is going to slide in, make sure the needle kind of goes right down this hole. The flap is fitted, and we've got two Allen key bolts or head screws that hold the cap onto the carb. Okay, so when I was taking the carb out, I actually unscrewed the outer cable of the throttle cable, which I now realize I don't need to do. So something to keep in mind when you do it. I'm gonna put this back in. I'm genuinely surprised and pleased at how easy working on the KTM is compared to the DRZ. So now I'm going to slide the carburetor back into its spot. So this boot is now connected. I'm now going to fit the air box onto this. Now I need to adjust the air box. Again, this has a little flange, one on the inside, one on the outside, and then it can kind of sit right against the carburetor over there. So now you can see that both ends of the carb are now connected, and I'm going to tighten the clips to keep it in place. Last thing to connect is the fuel hose. So that goes on. Again, this also has a clip. I'll put the air filter back in and wrap up the job. The next step is going to be to fill up some new petrol and start the bike. Looks like cleaning the carburetor alone didn't quite work out. So my next guess is that it's something to do with the spark plug. So I'm going to wrap up this video. In the next part of this series, I'm going to take off the tank and replace the spark plug on the bike. This was a first time experience for me, so I'd love to hear if I've done something wrong or if I could do something better. Please do give me your feedback on that. Thank you once again for watching. I'll see you in the next video.